What's up, everybody? It's EK back with another episode of the Devy Dose. Today, you're not going to want to miss this one. That is my wife's phone.
She doesn't want to miss it either, apparently,
The
right?
joy of being live. Anyway,
Get that bum off the show.
Yeah. Who is this guy? All right. Well, today we have my very special friend on, Brian Ford at FFJunkie_. Make sure you throw him a follow on Twitter if you're not already. He has tons of awesome content. And you want to take a minute and tell the people about what you've been working on, really?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Relish this opportunity. I think I'm going to be a little different from some of the other folks you have on. So I do mainly two podcasts. One is called Dynasty Fever, and that's audio only, and episodes drop on Thursdays. And you can follow that at Dynasty Fever Pod on Twitter. That's with my friend Jesse Schneeman, who's also from the Dynasty Warzone family of content. And then I'm part of the GoingFor2.com team, where I have a live podcast on Saturdays at 7:30 Eastern on YouTube called Dynasty Saturday Night 5. Me and Josh Walker, who's at Rotonaut on Twitter, we have a list of 5 each as just a vehicle to talk about Dynasty. So for the last episode we did was 5 post-combine rookie takes that we each had. And then I do writing. I still think there's a place for articles in the fantasy space. And so at GoingFor2.com, you can find my Dynasty rankings, my Superflex rookie rankings, as well as my articles, which mainly now have been prospect profiles. I've done like a bunch. I've done like Izzy and Rashee Rice and Hutchinson and Tillman and Eric Gray and Spears and Richardson. And I just done a bunch, just kind of cranking them out every couple days. Cedric Tillman just dropped this morning. So, check those out. There's some other folks doing them there too. So we're going to try to cover a lot of the names before the draft.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Sounds like you're cranking it out there. And I did read the Cedric Tillman profile. It's good stuff. If anyone's out there and you haven't read Brian's work yet, he's writing really good profiles over there with a lot of insight and context to the players and their situations. Mm-hmm. So I think, and you're probably prepped for this because it sounds like this is what you did on your pod this weekend. But So what changed for you with this wide receiver class after the combine? Anything slide substantially?
That's a really good question. We were saying before how the top 5 is pretty much, the top 5, just maybe shuffle a couple guys around. I was toying with the idea of having Addison as like the 1B in a tier with JSN. And I think after the combine, that's, I think he's just at the top of tier 2. And I dropped downs from 3 to 5. So right now I have JSN, Addison, QJ, Flowers, Downs as the top 5. I think it had more of an effect on putting guys like Jonathan Mingo, A.T. Perry, Bryce Ford Wheaton, putting them, I think, on people's radars and saying, the NFL is going to like the size and speed. There may be some other flaws, right? But it also, I think, did things to, affirm and confirm my priors for guys like Rice and Mims. And I think answered some athleticism questions for Rashee Rice. But all in all, not too big a shakeup. I know some people really dinged Addison and dinged QJ for being, shorter and thinner than we expected and not running the 40. I don't think that I dinged him as much.
Yeah, that largely makes sense to me. Rashee is I got to go read your profile on him. He's been such an interesting eval over the past year. For a little while, the rumors were that he was this Blazer and he was going to be a first-round pick. And I watched his film. I was interested in him as his freshman year. He had some really nice breakout games, and I do a lot of campus decanting. So you get those nuggets there, and even just the college production, super valuable. And I was like, man, this guy's he's not fast like that. It was good to see that he wasn't slow either, that he was pretty fast. But not a first round draft pick, but definitely a sleeper 3rd tier guy that I'm interested in. So my one thing that caught my attention, what you said was you dropped Downs. Was that more a matter of bringing up the other guys, or did you? Because I thought Downs performed like at or above expectations at the combine.
He did, but you know, there's a part of the scouting community that I think is kind of worried about him possibly being pigeonholed into being gadgety. And when you come in at 5'9" and 171, while you can say that, oh, well, that just means whatever he did on film is that much more impressive because he did it at that size, that's one thing. But now you're going to the NFL. And so when you come in like 2 inches shorter, 5 pounds lighter than we thought, you know, as much as the smalls are doing better now in the NFL, I think you can say that they very often need an alpha there to be a presence, at least to distract defenses. And so I think it was a size thing, and also I think I bumped Flowers up a little bit. I was probably lower on him than consensus. You know, at 5'9", 182 and getting a lot of, you know, targets close to the line of scrimmage, I was getting Rondell Moore vibes, you know what I mean? And I think he tested better than I expected. And so I think it was a combination of the two.
Yeah, I definitely hear you on Downs, and I'm lower on him than some film guys. I just don't think he's awesome on the outside. He's just not fast enough to run by guys on fly routes, and not big enough to, I mean, awesome contested catch receiver, right? But I just don't think an NFL team is going to be like, oh, we're putting this guy at X or we're putting this guy at Z and we're going to run deep routes with him. You know, it doesn't sound right to me. But then again, I mean, slot receivers can be the most valuable wide receivers in fantasy, right? So I'm not that worried, but that does make sense to me. And Flowers, honestly, I thought he was one of the most athletic guys in this class coming into the combine. I don't love some things on his tape. I feel like he relies on that athleticism rather than technical ability to win his routes. Like sometimes he'll do stuff that looks really fancy, but I'm like, what did you actually just do there? You like threw like a dead leg where you didn't need to, like on an in-breaking route. You should have just run your route, you know? I get a little bit of Kadarius Toney vibes from Flowers, honestly, just from the way he like does some of his routes and stuff, and the creativity and agility, but also a lack of polish. But you know, and I think that's mostly negative, but I still have him ranked like really pretty much in lockstep with you. I think I'm still going to take Downs first, but I hear your concerns, and they do make a lot of sense. Yeah, and I thought Tillman ran, you know, well for himself at the combine. I wasn't sure on film. I was looking at him and being like, he could be like a 4.59, 4.60 guy, which was gonna hurt, you know. But you know, I was happy to see him come in at like a mid, you know, 4.5s, mid 4.5s,
and I mean 37 on the vertical and 10.8 on the broad and a 9.56 RAS. I mean, you know, it's good. It's good stuff. I'll take it, you know.
Yeah, right. And Perry impressed, like you said. Yeah, that kind of showed up on film though too. He was always fast, just lacks some polish. And then I think for me, the guy that I was low on already, but kind of got another kick in the head was obviously Kayshon Boutte. I don't know. For me, it's just pile. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying I forgot to mention that it's almost like I just kind of like assumed we all like dropped him, you know.
Dropped him, yeah. We're just blacking it out of our memory. If you're Erdio and Devy pieces of him, you are sorely disappointed at this point. You know, he was the wide receiver one in this class for me, like, you know, 18 months ago.
Sure.
But yeah, and for me, it's just piling on to what I see as a narrative of him. I don't think it's a lack of ability. And like, I hate saying stuff like this with the players because it's usually going to sound like ignorant or whatever, but just the rumors at LSU were like that he wasn't a good locker room guy, that, you know, he had problems with the coaches and that cost him playing time. And then for a guy that was athletic coming out of high school to have not tested well, you feel like he probably just didn't train the way some of these other guys did, right? Because he doesn't look slow on film. Right. He definitely has explosiveness on film at times. You just have to think that like maybe he didn't, either that was just wrong and we're all delusional, or that he wasn't able to progress really at all.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? You don't like to see a guy regress on tape. You don't like to see a guy test much worse than we thought. He didn't do himself any favors. He came into this with people already thinking like he kind of got moody and didn't adjust to his slot role well right away this year. The sex party stuff, the locker room stuff, right? So he needed to test well to bolster some confidence in his outlook, and he didn't. So I mean, I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I had him, I think, at like wide receiver maybe 5 to 7 before the combine, and he's down at 14 now for me, and it's like, he could be like a 5th rounder in the NFL, some people are saying even later than that. So I don't know. Am I willing to take a shot on him in the 3rd round of a rookie draft? Yeah, but do I feel safer taking a shot on somebody like, say, Tillman, for example, who's marginal because of a late breakout, 1 year of production and being 23? I think I feel safer taking the shot on Tillman.
Yeah, I get that. And I think that's actually an interesting debate as well, because Booty certainly had, he has that one very early year of awesome production, put some great stuff on film that year, as opposed to Tillman, that really wasn't able to do much until, as you and I were discussing earlier, until his 4th year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a tough pill to swallow from a data profile,
right?
Like it's kind of like which kind of faulty profile do you prefer? But I'll say this, like, I don't know if it's a recency bias thing, but Tillman's film from 2022 is a lot better than Booty's film from 2022.
Yeah, I mean, people forget, I shouldn't say people forget, but it's easy to like say, okay, well, he was all like, he broke out in his 4th year, right? And this is what I was talking about, like context matters, right? He redshirted his 1st year. He's sharing a wide receiver room with guys who may not have a big NFL profile, but were useful in college. Callaway, Jawan Jennings, Josh Palmer, Velus Jones, etc. Right? They get a coaching change and a quarterback change, right? And now he thrives, right? And he was off to a good start in his 5th year in 2022 before he injured the ankle, right? So, and then he comes back and Hooker gets the knee, right? So, it's almost like you can't say, well, I'm going to credit him a 2nd year of production, because he didn't have a 2nd year of production. But when I'm thinking about bets to make and risks to take and sort of the overall picture of a prospect's profile, yeah, I'm willing to maybe say, okay, there's context that matters there that maybe like doesn't show up in raw analytics.
Yeah. No, I am with you, and certainly. For me, it's going to depend on cost, right? If he gets drafted even more highly than we expect, which I think is possible, it's possible that he's like the 5th wide receiver off the board, right? Like, I wouldn't be shocked. I'd be surprised, but I think that's a feasible outcome, right? That he's like the 5th or 6th wide receiver off the board. He comes off in the middle of the 2nd, and all of a sudden, everybody's all in on Tillman, and he's like a mid-2nd round draft pick. That's going to be tough for me because, and I hear you on the context, but you look at other guys that broke out late, that didn't have a great data profile, and you get that, like, if you're lucky, you get that like Josh Palmer kind of profile, who's a good NFL player and has had fantasy relevant games, right? But he's unlikely to ever be a superstar, right? Which really we want upside in fantasy football. Or who's the other kid I'm thinking of that went to Tennessee a couple of years ago? I think, was he a Tennessee guy as well? That same draft class. Do you remember that Tennessee took someone in the 2nd round who had a bad data profile, or the 3rd round, and they've just done nothing. You can't even get ahead of he's like a fourth stringer for him.
What you saying? The Titans drafted him?
Yeah, the Titans drafted a guy in the 3rd round in that same draft class that Josh Palmer went.
Is that Westbrook-Ikhine? Is that?
No, Westbrook-Ikhine a much later draft pick.
I'm trying to.
And he took this guy's job. I'll look it up.
Oh, Des Fitzpatrick?
Yes, Fitzpatrick.
Yeah. I actually,
profile.
Yeah. No, that's a good lesson to learn too, because I was like, this was a couple of years ago, and I was like, yeah, that's Fitzpatrick. He's like 6'2", he's 208. He's got good NFL size. People like him. Maybe I'll take a shot on him, and it's a lesson to learn that wasn't the shot to take, right? But yeah.
Yeah, those are, I guess, I don't like to I think we're probably more similar than not in terms of we like to both take film and data and then apply common sense and judgment. But those are the kind of lessons from like the data side of things, right? Where this guy had a weak production profile, all his production came very late, wasn't a hyper athlete or anything. And then just is an NFL player. He can get drafted. He'll make a roster, but has been unable to do anything at all for our fantasy teams. And if you took him in the third, you wasted that pick. There's probably a running back or a tight end that was there that would have been, a useful fantasy piece for you.
Yeah, I think that's important, right? Because I know you were talking with Noah about like art versus science, right? And I think for me, and I don't know how many people like to hear this from me, it's probably, I don't know, maybe 70% art and 30% science. I don't know how some people skew one way or the other. My process, quote unquote, is probably very different from guests you'll have on here. I have the humility to know that I am not a rookie guy, a rookie expert, right? I am a guy who is a really good researcher. I do watch some film on my own, and compiles everything, all the information that's out there, and then interprets it for the Dynasty community, saying, okay, here's what people who really know film much better than I do are saying. Here's what people who watch Saturday football a lot more than I do are saying. Here's what the numbers say analytically with, EPA per play and right. And what that means. And we plot it on a chart. Right. And then I say, okay, what's the expected NFL draft capital? Right. What are some lessons we've learned from players like this in the past? What does that mean for fantasy production? And therefore, what does that mean for your dynasty rookie drafts? Right. So my rankings right now are not pure evaluations of players. They're an expression of, what I think about them as far as NFL draft capital, fantasy production, and value. Right. So, for example, I'll have Hutchinson higher than, he's in like my mid-20s overall. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to take him, in the late second, right? Because he's been available in the late third or early fourth. But I'm signaling to people like, hey, listen, here's a guy with high floor that's a safe bet that's probably going to be a value, right? So I like him more than I like, say, a player below him who might have a better DC, like Jalen Hyatt, for example, but who I'm out on at cost, So I don't know how similar that is to a lot of the folks you have on here, but I have the humility to know that when I watch film, I don't watch it with as expert an eye as some other people do, right? Very often what happens with me is I'll touch base with people whose opinions I really trust, and I'll watch them watch the film, and then I'll watch some on my own so that, when they're talking about, subtle manipulation of defenders with hips, listen, I don't have the visual spatial for that. That's not the way my brain works. But when I see somebody say that, and then I go watch the tape on that guy, and I say, oh, I see what they're saying. Or I see, like, for example, there was somebody whose opinion I trust who was very critical of Zach Evans, right? And I looked at it and said, well, actually, I see what this other person says that has about subtle micro movements, right? And I think you're being nitpicky about, that he shies away from contact and runs out of bounds a lot. Now there's other questions with Zach Evans, right? But that particular scenario was something where I said, no, I don't see what you see. But I don't pretend to be the expert at subtle movements or at college football that some other people are. I dabble in Devy and C2C, so I've known about some of these guys for a while, but like I kind of know my place and know my role, and that's kind of what really dictates my process.
Yeah, no, man, I love that. I think there's a lot of wisdom in knowing what you know, right? Knowing your own strengths and
Mhm.
weaknesses. But I love that you still like are trying to see and like learn and pick up on things that the people that are more experienced than you are saying. And honestly, I'm not that far off from you. I watch a ton of film because I do feel like there's so many different voices in this community that will say completely opposite things and all say them with absolute authority,
Yeah.
right? And then it's just tough to know who to listen to if you don't have some capacity to assess it on your own, right? And even the same person, like you'll have someone who's a really sharp analyst, and then they have their weak spots, right? Either in things they're not good at evaluating, or in just players they get like suckered by. Like you get like a Matt Waldman who's like so good at so many things, and
Mhm.
you learn so much from him. I do
Mhm.
from listening to
Right.
his evaluations, and then once in a while he'll just have a soft spot for a guy and just like miss widely on the evaluation of it, or maybe he's projecting upside that doesn't come to fruition. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I think
I probably still, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just he reminds me that I probably still have a couple of Skylar Thompson and Kennedy Brooks shares because of my trust in Matt Waldman. But but like it's easy to pick up on the misses, right? And also a lot of those rankings were pre-draft, not necessarily post-draft, because he puts out a second set of rankings after the draft. But I know what you're saying, right? Like, and maybe 2-3 years from now, I've watched more film, I've gotten more practice at it, and my process is different. Right now, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think too, even like really, really good film guys and really good, well, actually, I'd say more film guys do like have listen and have conversations with each other and kind of work through stuff. Which so I think that idea of like benefiting from the conversation and from the discourse is it's
Mhm.
pretty ubiquitous, and like a
Yeah.
lot of times, again, I'm no expert film analyst. I think I've gotten a lot better in the past year as I actually started to take notes. Right. I
Mhm.
mean, that was an important step forward. Was actually taking notes and evals and going back. And, I started, last year when I was doing film evals, like really watching the play over and over again until I can see kind of what the coverage is, what's this guy supposed to be doing, and get an idea of that. But then this year I started really like taking detailed notes and documenting it
Mhm.
more. And I think that helps enormously. I still struggle though with quantifying it, right? And that's the thing I told Noah. I was like, I like his process where his film scores are coming from like on this individual play, the player did the right thing or didn't. That's kind of how PFF does it too. From
Mhm.
like what they make publicly available, you get like a -1, a 0, or a 1 on any given play, right?
Mhm.
Um, but like I struggle being like, okay, I really like Parker Washington, but what's his route running score for me? Is it a 6 or is it a 5? You know what I mean? And how much is he a better route runner than Reishi Rice or a poorer? Right. And then just like quantifying that all and laying it out in a scale is really hard. I don't feel comfortable doing that. So in my model, I'm using Lance Zierlein's grades, which
Right.
again,
Mhm.
he's not flawless either, but it gives me an objective data point.
Yeah.
Although I
No.
did
Yeah. It's a point of reference. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I did take it upon myself though, just to tweak some of them now because I can't even like after the combine, he was like, oh yeah, like I was a little bit wrong on JSN. I've raised him up and I was a little bit wrong on Jalen Hyatt and I brought him down. So
Yeah.
those are two evals that I wasn't really on the same page with him on. So I tweaked those a little bit to be more sensible, I thought.
Yeah, yeah, and also I think too, like you said, he's not flawless. I know a lot of people say that he factors in speed way too much, in his evals and things like that. So, I think, but you bring up an interesting point, and this is kind of my like one reason why I think it's much more art than science. There is this desire to quantify, and I don't know that we can as much as people would like to quantify it, right? I'm a
Mhm.
teacher, right? I teach high school history. I've been doing it for 21 years, right? And as time has gone on, rubrics have become more and more popular among educators, right? And I mean, it's had a lot of effects on teaching and on assessment and on education. One of them is the students don't care about the process and they just want to they just look at the boxes on the rubric and they want to check the boxes and they don't really care, right? But that's a whole other story. For me as a teacher, as a grader, what it's done is it's really boxed me in. And I find that when I look at the holistic quality of a student's assignment or presentation, I often give it a higher grade than I would if I went strictly by the rubric of like, do they get a 3.5 out of 5 on this, right? And so that's why for me, I like being squarely in the middle, and I like being comfortable with, like, once in a while it's gonna be a feeling or a hunch or I think this is a better bet than this guy, but I don't have like, oh, this guy is 8.62 and this guy's 8.59. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not the way that my particular brain works with these things, which is kind of, I think, not the way that a lot of other people think. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Jeff Abercrombie, the Sofa Scout, he's a lot more kind of in your camp, where I'm like, we'll be talking about, evaluating guys, and I'll be like, yeah, but like, how do we rank them? Like, how do we compare? Like, having the conversation that you and I are now. And he's like, I don't really do that. I just like to look at how they succeed. Like, is that going to translate to the NFL? Which is totally fine and valid. And also, he's a lot more focused on, like, his work he does is more NFL draft work, right? Like, his podcast is Saturday to Sunday. He's really focused on
I've listened to that sometimes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Him and Paul are awesome. Paul's really plugged in, and they're both really good film guys. Learn a lot from hanging out with them and listening to them. But I think it's totally valid. Yeah, I mean, I have the obsessive desire to quantify everything, partly because I do want to be able to make practical decisions as a dynasty manager. Like, am I drafting, Jackson Smith and Jigba or Jalen Gibbs or Jahmyr Gibbs? Given the opportunity, which one of those is going to be more valuable? We have to make these decisions, right?
Sure.
So
sure. One thing that I've been trying to incorporate, I'm sorry to is when it comes from a team nerd perspective, I try to incorporate more about like thinking about my thinking, right? Jacob Sanderson, for example, does a lot. He actually just released a Substack called Thinking About Thinking, and what I try to incorporate what that crowd does as far as opportunity cost, probabilities, ranges of outcomes, right? And and how does that factor into the decisions that I make? Because I think that matters and it applies to markets, both big and micro markets in leagues, more than I think I think that's easier for me to process. My brain and the way that I think is easier to process for me than having like a raw, like just very specific, scientifically quantifiable grade on a guy. It's just not the way that I work. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love Jacob too, man. Honestly, when I was starting to get into building models, he was one of the guys that was really helpful to me and kind of like, walking me through some stuff too. So, yeah, love what he does.
By the way, I just want to say hi to Toronto Dave, who I just really respect a lot for, number one, his enthusiasm about everything and hopping on like every podcast live stream, but also like his honesty and vulnerability, talking about mental health on Twitter, which I think we need to normalize more. And as somebody who is autistic and has ADHD and has a lot of mental health issues, he really encourages me to be to create that space to be vulnerable and open about it. So
yeah, that's awesome. I love Dave, dude. Dave is my home slice. I'm so stoked that he watches these. It makes me super happy, and to have him hopping in the chat makes me feel like we're connecting a little bit. Yeah, and I love what he does on Twitter as well. I think that's super important. We can talk about those things instead of stigmatizing them, right? All right, cool. So I think let's jump in from the top. I think we've done a lot of work in discussing some of these guys already. But let's, and again, I don't think we need to. The beginning of our rankings are pretty much in lockstep. I know I have some concerns about everybody that's not JSN at this point in time. But let's throw a card up. Let's take it from the top. And if we don't have a lot of points of contention, then I don't think we need to like overly dwell on repeating the same things that everyone else is saying about these guys. But what am I doing here? There we go. That's what I'm trying to do.
Oh, so looky.
Yeah, it's fun. My friend at Lucy with AK helps me with these. Like I started making them, and I'm not a great graphic designer.
No.
And he was like, "Hey, what if we did this?" And like cleaned it up for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did some really nice work on this, and I think it's nice for people that don't have access to like a big data set, like have something like this on the internet floating around for free. So
yeah, a real quick like cheat sheet for him. Like I'm in
yeah,
the middle of my rookie draft. Let me pull up this card. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, they're all up there on Twitter. If anyone's watching this and you want to get them, just check my tweets, or I'll throw out another thread of them with all the wide receivers after this. Just and tag my buddy so he gets some credit. So I mean, do you have anything to add to the JSN discourse? I know that the early criticisms were lack of high end speed. Everybody knows that. You know what I mean? He's just not ever going to be a run right by you guy.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have to be.
No.
And then the other criticism for me, the one thing that my model didn't like him that much until I didn't like him that much, like had him at 3 or 4 until I tweaked his film grade. But just the one season of production, right?
Sure.
And then this year too, he played in games but didn't produce in them because of the injury. So that really hampered his data profile. But I'm willing to kind of look past all that. I just think the kid can ball. I think what he does at an elite level, right? And then I think you saw some of that in the combine too, just with those like out of this world numbers on 3-cone and shuttle and things like that. So
yeah,
where are you at on JSM?
Yeah, agility, separator, not gonna be a burner. Underrated as far as like being open in all 3 levels of the field. He's not as small as the smalls that are going to be slot guys in this draft. And also, again, another example of context, right? Like as much as like I may not like it or other people might not like it, but there's probably a point where JSN said with the injury, I'm shutting this down. That game, that like 7 gazillion yard game in 2021 solidified me as wide receiver 1 in this class. I'm shutting it down. My draft stock is fine and I'm good. And like, that's the type of context to 2022 that I think, doesn't show up when you say like 1 year of production. Right. And when you don't run the 40, yeah, people don't like that. And yeah, it's sort of admitting a weakness, but it's also in some, you could make the argument like it's also saying I'm so confident I don't have to do this stuff. I'm fine. I'm good. I'm wide receiver 1. See you later. And so like I don't really get too hung up on that. So yeah.
Yeah, and you saw people like Najee, right? Najee skipped the 40 a couple of years ago. Didn't really hurt him. He still was the first or the second running back off the board in that class. Yeah. And I think we'll see a similar thing. I do think that, a lot of like draft nicks didn't have him as the wide receiver 1 before this, but I think that even those more like NFL draft people, less fancy football, are starting to come around. So, yeah, again, I don't think we got to beat a dead horse there. He's awesome, gonna be a stud. So I think my model actually might slightly prefer. My model slightly prefers QJ, but I, as you, actually prefer Addison. So what's your reason for having Addison over Johnston?
Yeah, Addison, not as necessarily a player comp, but he reminds me a little bit of Olave. He's smooth, and there's going to be a floor there. And when you're asking me to use the 106, 7, 8, 9 in a super flex on a player, give me that guy who produced in 2 different systems. Basically made Kenny Pickett a first round NFL pick, rather than QJ, who I'm kind of out on at cost. Which I guess we can talk about in a little bit based on some of my concerns with him. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah. I think Addison's a pro already, right? And I honestly have had that same thought with Olave as well. I think Olave's a lot faster than JSN is, than Addison is. Not that Addison's slow per se, but what would he run? Like it was like a 4.48 or something. It wasn't like
worse. Yeah.
It wasn't what we were hoping for.
4.49. Yeah, and the split wasn't great. It was 1.56, which isn't like terrible, but not elite by any means. His vert and broad were not impressive either. Ended up with a 5.82 RAS. So
yeah. Yeah, so weaker athletically than we would have liked for sure.
Mhm.
But he's a technician, right?
Mhm.
He's clean. His film's clean. My only film knock on him is there's that Utah game. I don't know if you've seen that, and the kid he's playing against. I don't remember the name. I don't spend too much time on defensive players, but the kid that he's playing against is the NFL corner, right?
Mhm.
Like a first or second round pick. But the guy beat Addison up like pretty
Yeah.
consistent. Like Addison won some reps, but like I had some fears on that. Like, is he going to be able to beat top corners in the NFL
Yeah.
with where he's going? We kind of want him to be, although the reality might be that he's a high-end wide receiver 2 for a team, and also for Dynasty.
Yeah.
It might be his cap, right?
Yeah, you have to wonder about the physicality and getting his routes jumped and how much he can improve that. Which again I think just speaks to the idea that we were kind of spoiled with some wide receiver classes before 2023.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. Not that these guys are bad, they're just not really holding up to what we've gotten recently. So I also have some concerns. Oh, not Jaden Reed, Quentin Johnston. There he is. I also have some concerns about QJ. But why don't you take the lead on QJ?
Yeah, so I think he came in a little smaller than people expected at the combine. Not a huge deal, but when you're saying to the world, my size speed combo being a unicorn is my selling point. Well, when you come in at that size and don't run the 40, like it kind of it is a concern. But I think with him, body catching drops, physicality for a guy his size. Like, for example, we were talking about Tillman before. Tillman did pretty well against Ringo, the Georgia corner. QJ got eaten up by him in the national championship game. There's just, I think, some I shouldn't say red flags, but some concerns, some inconsistency. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt in the sense that like there's a ceiling there and there's room to grow, and he's kind of raw. And that, I think it's only his 5th year of organized football, because I think he was coming from like a basketball or a track background early on. So, because of that sort of benefit of the doubt, he is my wide receiver 3 in sort of a mini tier within a tier with Addison. But I think where I'm going to be asked to draft him or Hyatt or Downs or Flowers, like, I think I would probably lean on, like, I don't know, Charb or a tight end,
Yeah. So you're at that point in the draft, you see yourself pivoting to running back or to Mayers.
I mean, it depends on capital draft, but it's possible. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah.
I've had the same thought as well, although I think I'm probably a little more in on Downs than you are still.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think you summated it well. I mean, my first knock on QJ is you see the letters in the box, or the 4.6. That's his composite production index, which is just like a fancy name for my model. Like my model without draft capital, without any film grades, just pure production. It's not a good number. He really didn't produce at that high of a level or with any consistency in college, right? If some of his per games played stats are a little better, his yards per route run is a nice number. 2.7 is a great number, but just didn't ever, dominate the receiving share. It failed to take over games, particularly in big spots. And then, of course, the film stuff is just brutal. I mean, we'll often nitpick a guy for body catches, bringing it in, but on QJ's film, you see over and over again it costing the team interceptions, it costing the team touchdowns, it costing the team yardage as he's T-Rex arming these deep balls and letting smaller corners jump them, come down with the ball, or break up passes that should have been huge gains for TCU. So Matt Cooper at all, but he puts out some really nice video content, and he has a QJ profile that just shows, like, it's really well produced, and it just like shows all these plays, and it's not one game, it's not one play, it's like endemic to his body of work. And then my thought with that's always like, well, to what level can this get coached up, right? Like,
right, yeah.
is this a thing that, like, he can spend the off season with a good wide receiver coach and a footwork guy and really like tighten it up for the NFL. But the other part of the criticism, and this makes sense to me, is that like some of the stuff you see is just effort stuff too, right?
Yes.
Like him not going for a contested catch,
Yes.
him just completely refusing to block as the running back runs by him and gets tackled. Stuff like that makes me question if he is the guy that can improve at the next level.
Yeah, I know that like a lot of team spreadsheet doesn't like, when people say he's got a dog in him, like, but like he doesn't, right? He does not have the alpha my ball mentality. I call it his compete, right? He doesn't have the compete. I saw, Lejeune and DiRienzo doing a video, and I think DiRienzo referred to it as his want to motor. Like, what's there, and you have to wonder, does he get surrounded by, guys who are making millions of dollars to play the game and take it seriously, and coaches that, don't really care too much about your draft capital, and, he learns the hard way? Yeah, maybe, right? But, it's a concern.
Yeah. And I'm pretty risk averse with the high cost players, right? Like the second round, third round, I don't care. I'm just chasing ceiling. But in the first round, and this is a Richardson thing for me too. In the first round, I'm very conservative with where I spend my money. I took a lot of Burks last year because the data profile was flawless, production in the SEC, like if he's beating guys that were going to be NFL corners, why won't he succeed in the NFL? And then that still stinks for me a little bit now. Not that I still think he works out, but he's worth vastly less right now, like in terms of capital, than Garrett Wilson, than Drake London, even than Chris Olave, who went much later in rookie drafts.
Right, but I think there's also micro markets too. Like, for example, I have a really big tier of wide receivers 16 to 26. Burks is towards the top of it, and Drake London's towards the middle of it. Right, like I like Burks's upside and ceiling moving forward, probably a little bit more, than I like London's. Where I went wrong last year was being out on Watson at cost, and
me too.
He ended up producing a lot sooner than I thought. I think there's definitely some boom bust to his game, but I was looking at some numbers going under the hood, and there's a lot of good reason to bet on him. I'm usually risk averse, right? But I'm coming around to certain ways that ceiling is floor. And I did a 40-minute video on why Anthony Richardson should be quarterback one. And maybe we can talk about that another time.
Yeah, for sure. I'll retweet the video for you too, man.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Like, if he figures it out, he's Jalen Hurts plus, right? But there's a lot to figure out, and that's my concern. But definitely, maybe we can come back on and talk about that a little more. And I do love Watson now. I started acquiring him last year when he was still affordable, which he really was till the end of the season. There were some people that, even in like November, still were selling him at what I thought was a low cost for him at that point with what we'd seen, just touchdown rate, things like that. But for me, I expected him to take a long time to figure it out because he was coming from just like not one tier down, but 2 tiers down in terms of competition. And I was wrong. He
had some weird hands things too. Like, this like weird way that he would like invert his hands, be over, like, so, there was questions there the same way there was questions with QJ, maybe different types of questions. Right. So someone asked me the other day, like, at what point would you start taking capital for Christian Watson? Right. 109 is probably like right around like, what I'm thinking about. But in the end, like, would you rather have essentially Watson or QJ, right? You're going to take at the 109. I know the 109 is fluid. It's not locked into a player. So it's a different type of asset than the player you're going to pick with the pick. But in the end, I'll take Watson.
Yeah, I would. I think I would even go a couple of picks higher than that, right? I'd rather have Watson than QJ. I think I might rather have Watson than Addison, honestly. Watson gets open, man. He gets open. Like he's already succeeded to the NFL level. Addison hasn't. He might be better, but I don't know that right now. Give me the proven asset, unless I really think that the ceiling is different. But how could you really argue that many wide receivers have a bigger ceiling than Watson, right?
Absolutely.
He's a freak athlete, touchdown scoring machine. Like, his ceiling is a top 8 wide receiver. It is, So on to the opposite of that.
Seamless transition into 5'9", 171.
Yeah. And I mean, down scores touchdowns, but he wins contested catches, but he does it with skill and technique and body control, not with size and, a little bit of speed. But I think we talked about him a good amount already, but you want to give me a couple more lines on downs. What are you doing with him?
I mean, I want to like him, and I want to like him more than QJ because in my mind, I kind of do. Like, because he's the type of player you want, plays bigger than his size, like, seriously has a compete level and, is has better ball skills and things like that. But, in the end, this is the NFL, and in the NFL, 5'9", 171 is going to pigeonhole you into a type of receiver. Right. And I like downs, but, here's the thing. Right. The other couple weeks ago, I published a Marvin Mims profile. Right. And basically my tagline with Marvin Mims this whole time has been he's discount Josh Downs. I can get 75% the player at 50% the cost. Right. Well, now Mims isn't such a discount anymore, which we'll get to in a little bit. But I don't know that Downs, is head and shoulders above some of the other smalls that I can get cheaper. Like at cost, I'll take Mims at like 210 to 303 more than I'll take Downs at 110 to 203. I think,
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I think it's very valid. So I do lean on data a lot, and Downs' data profile is pretty flawless. So I think that's why I still have him around 4, but I think you're making a great point. Like what does Downs do substantially better than Mims? The contested stuff, probably, right? But other than that, I mean, I think Mims is good too. I'm probably a lot higher on Mims than most people are. But yeah, I think it's a valid concern. He is small. Draft capital will tell us a lot, right, about what the NFL thinks about him. But I still think he's not getting out of the second round, right?
No, he's not. No.
You give me that data profile, second round draft capital. Right. I just have a lot to forecast a guy that's going to be a useful fantasy football piece.
Let me ask you a question about the production part. So I'm looking, shout out to Jason Stein of the Devy Royale. I get a lot of the analytics from him, so I don't have to get them myself, and he's got when he looks at year-to-year production, he kind of factors in like that you should be growing, right? So that like there's like a factoring in age and experience. So like I don't know, like a 2.10 yards per receiving yards per team pass attempt is different in year 2 than it is in year 4, because in year 4 you should be doing better, right? So he has a couple of things going from green to red year 2 to 3 for Downs, and I'm wondering if there's context to those numbers that I just don't know about. For example, the receiving yards per team pass attempt going from 3.49 to 1.96, Dominator dropping from 35 to 26. The EPA per play goes up, but it's still 0.70 in year 3, which according to him is red, below the threshold you want from a year 3 prospect. Now, in the end, you look at, he checks the box for, the Dominator over 20% year 1 or 2, Dominator over 30% at least once. He's just under the receiving yards per team pass attempt of 2.0 for his career average for a top 24 wide receiver, right? And his EPA per play is above 1. It's 1.25. So like those are good averages. But when you say like the profile is like really like pops out to you as like, I want to say flawless, but like excellent, what are some of the things you're looking at that maybe I don't have available to me?
So, I mean, I am using a lot of best season stats. I use a mix of best season and career averages
Right.
that
Yeah.
go into my model. I don't age adjust them. Maybe I should play with that. I know a lot of people do. I see that it could have some benefit. Also, some of our numbers are just different. It looks like for downs, I have him having a better EPA per play this year than he did last year. He went up to 7. Is that what you said, or 0.7?
Yeah, but according to him, it's still red. I think because it's red for like a year 3 player. I have to double check with him as the threshold for that, but I think that's kind of why it's still red. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, his sophomore season is stellar, right?
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
1,335 yards, 11 touchdowns. I mean, he still has a career 2.62 yards per route run. The other thing I've seen people criticize him for is his yards per route run against man was less than that. It was like 1.99, which isn't awesome. But his yards per route run against zone, which teams play more zone than not, and he's probably a slot guy, probably gets a lot of zone, is like 4.5.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, I totally hear those criticisms. The model likes him the way it is right now with the inputs I have, and that has correlated well historically to fantasy football production.
Well, I think you bring up a good point though, and I want to ask your opinion on this because I think you're more well versed in the data than I am. So, you talked about the idea that slot guys aren't going to get a lot of man, right? And that's true, right? You can almost when I start my spreadsheet next year, I'm going to go into the wide receivers and I'm going to fill everybody in with limited route tree, and remains to be seen how they do against press, and then just delete the guys who aren't like that because it's easier that way. Because like every college wide receiver, that's one of their criticisms, right? So all that to say, I asked a couple people who are numbers people, like the data says that if you check the alpha size boxes, you're more likely to be a top 24 and especially a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. Is it possible that in a few years that advantage will be lowered when we have more data on the smalls doing well in quote unquote the new NFL that spreads out more, that probably sees more zone and less man than they used to? And when you have, smaller slot guys doing well, or like the Slim Reapers of the world, being practically a top 12 dynasty wide receiver, do you anticipate that in a few years that alpha versus beta thing might be different?
I think it's already changed a little bit, honestly. I mean, the guys with that like alpha profile in the past few years haven't been as much of a lock as they were historically going back. And these beta type profiles have been very successful. I really do think it's flipped already. And that's as the NFL has gotten smaller and speedier, right? But it could well, the pendulum could swing back the other way. I mean, that's been a talking point this year already, as NFL teams getting bigger, getting heavier sets, starting to play aggressive run offense again. The Patriots have been doing that. As much as they're a bad team right now, they're usually kind of a little bit ahead of the curve on like what's coming next in the NFL. But yeah, I just think I don't think that matters as much now as it used to. And I think it'd be a really interesting study to do, to see, just plot the curve of it, right? Because I bet the lines used to be like this. They've probably converged quite a bit amongst the two of them. But yeah, I'm not the guy with the data on that right now, but I think my gut says a lot like what yours does, that it's become much less relevant. Maybe it's just the character of the wide receivers that have come out lately. Like a lot of the guys that have been awesome, like just haven't fit that mold. You know what I mean? Like London, kind of, but he's not that fast, right? Typically we think alpha, like big, fast, strong, right? Who else has been like even in that mold lately? Burks, but Burks isn't even an X receiver, right? He's a slot guy.
Would you say Pickens?
Pickens for sure, but I don't think he's he hasn't done as much to prove himself as other guys, right? And honestly, what we know about him so far, and this is Matt Harmon has his reception perception out from last year, and there's some other things. I like the the ESPN Plus stats that they've been putting out with the open score and the catch score.
Mm-hmm.
And Pickens is like all catch score, no open score.
Yeah, he's not getting open. Yeah.
He's Allen Robinson plus, right? Like that's the model, right? Allen Robinson was never a break free in the open field, get open guy. He just catches anything that's within 6 feet of him, right? And I think that's who Pickens is, which we've seen Allen Robinson have like a wide receiver 1 overall season. So I'm not saying it's a bad profile, but yeah, we could be having a different conversation next year. Pickens goes off for 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns and puts this to bed, but I think he's really interesting to watch what he does this year in the next phase of his development, probably more so than anyone else from that class for me. All right, let's move on. So Downs, more to be revealed, but I am a fan. So Zay, we talked about Zay a little bit already. I think we both like him. We both have some questions. Do you want to wrap up our Flowers conversation?
We've talked enough about him. He's someone that I'm kind of like, okay, I'll take the fact that he is where he is, and the NFL is going to like him where they like him, and that's going to mean that I probably need to have him in my top 5 or 6 ranked wide receiver. But I don't think there's anything really that like excites me about Zay the way that I think some other people are excited about him.
Right.
I talked about him, making a lot of his bacon, with the close to the line of scrimmage targets. I don't know that I probably should have Downs ahead of him. I maybe ding Downs a little too much on the size thing. Zay, 48 games, so he's a veteran with lots of production. Like as soon as Dillon was gone, he was the offense, for Boston College. So that says something. He's got good ball tracking, and acceleration, and he's got solid yak. He'll find a way in the new NFL to get some quick passes and get some yak and probably surprise some people with a little bit more of a vertical threat. But again, at that size, now translating into the NFL, the physicality is a question, right? He's an older prospect. I don't know, right? Like I like him where he's at, but it's not a guy that's like, really jumping out to me as someone that like excites me or anything like that.
Yeah. The one thing that I do like about Zay more than Downs is I do think Zay can win on the outside. Like he was not really a slot receiver at BC. He played all over the field, and where I said Downs can't just run by guys, Flowers can. He can win on goes and flies consistently. Downs wins on some deep routes, but not those ones. He wins on deep posts and outs and stuff like that. So I think Flowers has a lot of potential. Like I said, I think there's some stuff he's going to have to work on because a lot of his success was against weaker competition. Certainly had some good games against tough corners, but I do think he's a little bit unrefined for what he needs to be to succeed with his profile.
Right.
So, so on to your wide receiver 6, which was
let's talk.
Hutchinson.
my man, Rashee Rice. Yeah,
Rashee, I do like Rashee quite a bit. Let me throw a card up for him. Where are you, Rashee? Eyeballs are failing me. There we go, Rashee. So. Why should I draft Rashee, and where are you drafting Rashee?
So, Rashee Rice is someone who, when we think about being risk averse, when we think about a floor, right? I think about guys like Rice and Hutchinson and Mims, so I kind of all have in this tier. Rice was, came in a little smaller than we expected, but his height, weight, and BMI all check like the quote unquote alpha size, right? He came in after the combine more athletically than we thought. He answered some athleticism questions, 9.65 RAS, as I said before, pretty good 40 time, etc. He's got good hands. He's a playmaker. I think he He can win in different areas of the field. I think he's not going to have like great yak because he's not super athletic, but he's good enough. He's just well-rounded. I think of Rashee Rice as a safe, well-rounded prospect. A couple drops here and there that you don't like, fumbles here and there that you don't like. But I think, you saw him win outside. You saw him win in the slot. He's physical. He's a good blocker, which the NFL is going to like. And I know, like, people don't like this, but he has that alpha mentality of this is my ball, right? And I'm gonna get it. He has that compete that a guy like QJ doesn't really have. I'm not saying that he's, going to be elite, right? But when we get after the top 5 and, you kind of called it the Wild West, it's kind of like pick your poison. Rice is a guy that I'm willing to take a bet on. He's available in the 3rd round in a lot of the mocks that I'm doing, right? He's going to be available after Mims, but I have him kind of in a mini tier right with Mims as far as like a good bet to make and guys that I like and guys that I trust. I'm trying to pull up his analytics to see if there's anything that like I like really hate. And I look at the production stuff and there's a lot of yellows and reds, but in the end, he hit his dominator of over 20% year 1 or 2. He hit his dominator of over 30% in his best season. He's in an SMU offense, which doesn't ask you to run a whole lot of, varied routes and that sort of thing. So it's not like he doesn't have a learning curve, right? And it's not like, he's not already an older prospect, but I don't know, in a class that is kind of underwhelming, he's a guy that I'm like, okay, I like betting on him and Mims and Hutch more than I'll bet on, I don't know, Hyatt, right? Or I don't know who's also in that range for me. Reed, Jaden Reed, and Boutte, like these are the bets I want to make at that point in the draft. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I do like Rashee, and I do like that he did do some stuff earlier in his career. Obviously, I hate that he's a non-early declare. I'm with you, though, on like there's only a few guys in this class that have anything approaching that alpha profile, which even though I'm not like sold at this point that like that's the key to fantasy football success, that's an attractive trait to NFL teams if they need a boundary receiver, right? If they need a big guy to put out there, they're going to be looking. They're going to have only a few options in this class to look at, and Rashee might be one of the better ones. And honestly, all your guys in this middle tier, kind of that profile, right? He had the most contested catches anyone in this class in his best season, and almost the same amount that London had. Right. But I think like London, it's not that he can't get open. It's just that you can throw it to him anyways. I do think that he has some route running ability, plenty of athleticism, and, certainly a lot of things that he does well. I think you were right on when you said he's a well-rounded wide receiver. Again, I don't think it would take a lot of projection to say this guy is going to be, top 15 dynasty wide receiver ever. But is he a guy that's going to get on the field? Yeah. Like, I think he's going to get some draft capital, probably 3rd round. Maybe he's a 4th round guy. I don't think he's like a late day 3 guy by any means. I think he's going to get, a top 120 type pick here. Hopefully round 3,
Yeah. I think, you bring up an important point about, who are we drafting and what are our expectations? People automatically are like, well, I need to be excited about a guy. Well, I mean, I'm excited about a guy within context and within realistic expectations. When I look at the running back class, for example, there's 12, 13, 14 guys deep that I think could be at least RB2s or 3s, right? Probably more so 2s, right? Now that's exciting. Are like 9 of those 12, probably going to turn out to be solid guys that are just, RB, I don't know, 22 to 38 or something like that. Yeah, that's who you're drafting, right? And that's a hit, right? Those are guys you want on your fantasy roster. Not everybody is going to be like, a superstar, and I think some people are starting to ding the 23 class because, it was supposed to be this Messiah class. And I just don't see it, because I look at the depth of the class, even at wide receiver, which is an underwhelming class. I don't know. We like Parker Washington, and I've got him like 11th. That's kind of cool. That my wide receiver 11 is somebody I'm like, yeah, I can see him, being a flex option on my fantasy roster. Like, I think people have to, be reasonable about expectations.
Yeah, I think that's a good point for sure. We we want to put everyone up on the pedestals this time of year, particularly, right? We want to wish cast all these guys into being superstars. And, if you get a guy that's a starting NFL wide receiver in the 4th round of your rookie draft or the late 3rd round, then that's probably was okay. I do tend to pivot to running backs once I get past the guys that I really think have a profile to be like a top 36 wide receiver. But you know what? A guy like Ray Shee, if he takes another step, why can't he be like wide receiver 40 or wide receiver 35? Right. He certainly has some assets and some stuff that says that, he might be able to win in the NFL as well.
Right. Yeah. So, like you said, it depends on what's on the board, right? Like I have them ranked a certain way because I said my process is different and it incorporates like value and fantasy potential and that sort of thing. But, if I drafted just strictly off my board, I probably wouldn't be doing it right. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be a situation in a draft where, I don't know, let me just for a quick second here, pull up like my positional tiers and look at my running backs, right? Like if I think Eric Gray or Roschon Johnson, right, have a good landing spot for their traits, and I technically have both of them below Rashee on my overall big board, and they're all available, I might take Roschon or Eric Gray in say the early 3rd because I think I can probably get Rice later, so that's just it's a matter of, knowing what's going on in your draft room,
Yeah, for sure. And team composition a little bit too. I'm okay with going with positions of need within a tier, right? Like if you're short on running back depth or an RB, 3 is going to be more useful to you than a wide receiver 4, then do what makes sense for your team.
Absolutely.
Comp. Yeah. So who do you have next? Oh, sorry.
One thing to keep in mind that I'm starting to, I don't want to say learn, but really incorporate is that guys who can be solid wide receiver 2s in fantasy grow on trees, right? There's a 400 wide receiver 2s in fantasy, right? And that's why I think if you have DJ Moore, capitalize on this trade buzz and trade him because you can get DJ Moore somewhere else, right? Like, so I think you bring up an important point. We kind of poo-poo the running back position, but there becomes a certain point in the draft where it makes sense then to pivot to these, guys that you can churn in and out week to week, and play 0 RB with some of these guys, like Roschon Johnson. He's probably going to be like, I don't know, an injury away, from being super fantasy relevant at some point. And as the guys on Dynasty Rewind say, at some point in the season, we're all playing 0 RB because of the injuries. So, grab a guy like that.
Yeah, I love that. And frankly, Roschon could take 3rd down work right away, depending on where he lands. He's a more skilled blocker and receiver than a lot of guys. So who did you have next, Hutchinson or Tillman?
Mims is next for me. Like Rice and Mims are like a mini tier within a tier at 6 and 7. And then it's Hutchinson, Tillman, Hyatt below them in that tier.
Yeah. And I am personally taking Mims over Rice, but I get where you're coming from. I like the early breakout. I like that he's a junior, but it is like we are overstuffed with little wide receivers in this class. So I could easily see an NFL team, selecting a Ray Shee or, a Tillman over Mims just because there's just been so many of these guys coming out the past few years, like little agile guys. So what do you like about Mims?
What's not to like, right? No, I mean, like he tested well and really solidified that, he kind of is who we think he is. Athletic, ball tracking, hands, route running is good enough, right? I think as Brandon Lejeune has pointed out, like he got a lot of free release. So it's not always easy to see how great a route runner a guy is when he gets a lot of that free release and that cushion. He's very physical. He's a blocker, which the NFL is going to love. He's the kind of guy, like I said, who's like a discount Josh Downs. Like everything we like about Josh Downs, for the most part, Mims has to some degree. So kind of like just say, okay, I like Downs, so I should like Mims, except he's gonna cost less. I'm looking a little bit here at some notes. He's the most physical of the smaller receivers. He can be he's a vertical threat, but he's not just a deep guy. And I think some people don't give him enough credit for that. He does get targets in all three levels of the field. And what I liked about him too, and this doesn't show up a lot of times, is, he succeeded with quarterback and coaching changes. That's kind of meaningful, right? Like Caleb and Lincoln Riley leave. He stays in Oklahoma and still lights it up. That means something to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, not a lot of great quarterback play in Mims's college career.
Yeah.
I don't think Rattler was very good. And
Dylan Gabriel
this year. Yeah. Dylan Gabriel's fine sometimes, but I remember my video profile I did on Mims is full of me just being like, Dylan Gabriel's pretty bad.
I watched that video.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of that on there. But yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you on Mims. I do think when he did get coverage at the line of scrimmage, he's able to get free. He was able to get nice releases off the line of scrimmage. Certainly, I don't remember him having like a varied release package, but I remember him being able to get off the line. I feel like he got jammed a little bit sometimes and had a little bit of a hard time with that. But you're 185 pounds, right? But yeah, I mean, I love that he has that speed. He has better yak than most of the guys in this class. And you saw that sometimes in some of those little screen passes, pop passes to him. But I don't know. I think that there's a lot of things he does well. I think he's going to get some draft capital. And I'll say that his marks, like pretty much across the board, are lower than my like average of guys of a top 12 season. I mean, as are Towns and Flowers and all these guys. Mm-hmm. But I mean, everything across the board was lower than that, but still good, right? But I think that goes back to what you were saying about expectations, right? Like, do I think Mims is ever going to be a top 12 fantasy receiver? No. Do I think he's a guy that's probably going to be, a useful flex back end of the roster guy for the next 8 years? Yeah, like that's probably what he's going to be, but the big play receiver too, like you're going to have spike weeks, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes that can be really nice in that, like, back of the roster, third flex spot. You get the guy that can catch a couple of long touchdowns and put up a 25-point week for you sometimes.
What do you make of the criticism that his best year was his freshman year, and you want to see more growth? Does that hold water with you?
I mean, you had a big coaching change, right? Like you totally changed your system. Quarterback changes. I don't know. It's tough for guys to really grow when they have that much fluctuation around them. And statistically, I mean, his best receiving year was this past year in terms of raw counting stats, substantially. His freshman year, where do I even have it in here? Freshman year, he had 610 receiving yards, stepped that up to 705, and then 1,006. He did have a really nice yards per route run, I remember, freshman year. I don't have that in this data set, but I do. I just curtail this to make it so I can find stuff easily. But, I mean, high yards per route run can happen for a lot of different reasons. Like,
sure.
Maybe he wasn't on the field that much, you know what I mean? Maybe he ran a few routes and was often – one of the top targets on that. Maybe he was getting the wide receiver, the DB3, you know what I mean, from the other team. Maybe he was getting the weakest coverage. There's a lot of reasons you can have a really high yards per route run on a small sample, which it was a relatively small sample. So I don't think you can get overly worried about that.
Right.
I don't know. I was disappointed in his sophomore season, I didn't think he progressed much there, but I was pleased with what he did this year. He was the wide receiver 1 for a run first team, heavily run first team, and still put up 1,000 yards.
Yeah, and had his best dominator and best receiving yards per team pass attempt year in year 3. So so I have him in my article here comped to, and this is a part I need to improve on. I know you don't love comps, but Curtis Samuel, Tyler Lockett, a smaller Christian Kirk, Darnell Mooney, and a sort of Brandon Cooks, especially because of the physicality. So what do you think about that as far as Mims goes?
I can see all of those, honestly. I don't think he's as refined as Brandon Cooks was coming out of college. Like Cooks was a really good college receiver.
Yeah.
Right? In my model, he's like right up there in the first page. Just his production was phenomenal. But yeah, like the play style, I totally get it. I think he's got a little more to his game than Darnell Mooney. But I get that as like a medium low comp, right? Or honestly, in terms of production, like peak Darnell Mooney might be the best we can hope for Mims, right? Peak Darnell Mooney was a really good fantasy asset. But, he unfortunately has faded a little bit since that spike season. No, I love it. The physicality as a smaller guy. I could definitely see all of those guys. All right. So Hutchinson or Tillman?
Hutchinson is next. Hutchinson, Tillman, and Hyatt, they're in like a mini tier, but I do rank within the tiers, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
My love for Xavier Hutchinson is probably irrational. When it comes to Rashee Rice, when I talk about being well-rounded, that's Hutchinson taken to another level. He is a floor play. He is a safe bet. He is not a guy who's going to wow you with any sort of super elite traits, but he's going to do everything well enough. He's a savvy veteran. He produced in, a not so great program with not so great quarterback play. Putting aside Brock Purdy's NFL playoff performance, although I would say that wasn't a Purdy performance, that was a team performance.
Yeah, true.
And good enough athleticism, good enough route running, good hands, good football IQ. He doesn't check the box as far as age and all that goes, but he has the alpha height, weight, and BMI in a class full of smalls. I believe his 40 time gave him a relatively good speed score. I have to hop over to the other tab. His breakout age is 20. So it's right at the line, but it's not above it. It's not older than that for those of you who like that.
Where did you find a 20-year-old breakout age? Is that on Player Profiler?
That I think was in Jay's spreadsheet.
I thought he was older than that because he was a junior college transfer.
He was JUCO, yeah. I think it might incorporate the JUCO. I have to double check.
Oh, that's possible.
Hold on a second.
Looking at his recruiting profile, he was committed in 2019. Oh, so maybe he's not that old.
So
committed to Iowa State.
Jay has BOA breakout age right here at 20. So
yeah.
It's right on the line, right?
He graduated from high school in 2018. Mm-hmm. So it's unlikely that Jay is right about that. He's 5 years out of high school right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah, he broke out last year. So I'll shoot Jay a DM.
Okay.
Sounds like it should be 21.
All right. He has a dominator rating of 30+% at least once. His career receiving yards per team pass attempt is over 2. His best EPA per play season is over 1. There's a lot to like. I think he's a volume guy for me. Jacoby Myers, Keenan Allen, Michael Thomas, Xavier Hutchinson. Maybe not as good as those guys. He's a volume PPR reliable guy that I can plug in as a wide receiver 3 or flex. And his availability in the late 3rd and early 4th round to me is going to be tremendous value. And I would not be surprised if, because he tested pretty well at the combine, at least enough to, poo-poo people who said he was unathletic, I would not be surprised if the NFL looks at this guy and says, we can rely on him. And then he rises up draft boards a little bit when you look at question marks with some other guys in the receiving class. I'm trying to pull up, hold on one sec. I think his current projected draft capital as per mock draft database is still a third rounder. Yeah. So, I mean, he's getting day 2 capital, right? So, I don't know. Checks a lot of boxes for me. Again, he's not going to wow you. He's not sexy. He's safe.
Yeah, I thought I was going to like Hutchinson more than I did after he ran through my model. I mean, he actually was pretty good in the CPI, but he got slammed by Zerline on the film score. He gave him a 5.87, which is like average backup, end of the roster type guy. And I haven't done a detailed film study on him yet myself, so I don't know what to say about it. But as terms of casual football watching from college football during the season, I thought he looked great, man. I thought he was making plays on the boundary and really doing some stuff that I thought was going to translate to the next level. So I don't know what to make of him right now.
One small thing he does really well too is, and again, this was somebody else breaking down film. I picked up on it once I saw it, but they were talking about transitioning upfield once he catches the ball. And that he's sort of an expert at like not wasting movement and like using space well and knowing even when the defender's behind him where to turn to transition and go upfield and things like that. They can be meaningful. They can be the small difference between barely moving the sticks and gaining a few extra yards. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely like that trait of the guy having a plan when the ball is in the air and already having awareness of where the defenders are and being a smooth transition to the runner. It's a great trait to have. So Tillman's
next. Yeah, we talked about him a little bit, already about the context around his year 4 breakout and the context around like he probably would have had a really good 2022. So I won't say too much more about him, but again, in a class of smalls, he checks some size boxes. Some people, really liked him as far as, locker room guy and that sort of thing. I know that doesn't translate well to a lot of people who might be watching, but it matters for the NFL draft. 9.56 RAS, speed and burst scores were both 79th percentile. It's not great, but like, it checks a good enough box for a guy who's 6'3" and 213, and you only really want him to be a reliable boundary receiver. EPA per play in 2021 was 1.09, had a dominator rating of 34% at one point. There are knocks on him for sure, like the age, which is one reason why he's a little further down in the ranks for me. He's not an early declare. He didn't have an early breakout. His production numbers, fall short of some common thresholds. So that's, 2.88 receiving yards per team pass attempt in year 4 is great. But when you end up with a career average of 0.85, some people who like the data more are gonna flag that. To me, he's ranked where he is because of value. He's one spot above Hyatt because I think at cost, I'm much more in on Tillman than I am on Hyatt.
I think that after all said and done, Tillman might be going ahead of him in rookie drafts. Honestly, I don't think Hyatt's a first round NFL pick anymore, but I totally hear what you're saying. I'll just say this. Yeah. If Tillman did what he did last year, but he did it in his actual 3rd season in the NFL, like I'd be all in on him. But the problem for me is he's a guy that was beaten up on kids that are 2 years younger than him. That's tough. He should have been in Jalen Waddle's draft class. You know what I mean? So these guys have already played 2 NFL seasons. And it's just that effect of I don't care about his age. I care about the fact that it took him being a year older than everyone else on the field to have a breakout season.
That's an important point to make about some of the age stuff. People tend to just think it's an automatic ageist thing, that, it's a check for early breakout, but it's about context, right? It's about it took you that long to be better than everybody else. And it's about you're doing it against people who are younger than you. And I get all that. And that's why he's not wide receiver, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 for me, like he is for some people who love film. He's down there at 10 for me, I think, or 9, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and as much as I push back on him because I want to like Tillman more than I do, I probably have him ranked like nearly identically to you. I probably have him ahead of Hutchinson. Honestly, I just think does some things really, really well. But again, he's a guy that like I won't be surprised if he, gosh, who's the guy that the Cowboys? Oh, Tolbert. I won't be surprised if he Jalen Tolbert's us. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I won't be surprised if he's a good producer and he's a starter on an NFL team,
yeah.
but I also won't be surprised if he just like doesn't win a starting job.
And
that's how I feel about Hutchinson too.
Yeah, and to me, it's about the acquisition cost. Like when people say you love Hutchinson, yeah, I love him because of the acquisition cost versus like the safe floor, like or what I think is a safe floor, like. Yeah, that's why I'm saying I'm like super excited that I can get Hutchinson or Tillman in the 3rd round, and with Hutchinson early 4th round, right? Like that's why I'm excited about them. That's why they're good bets, right? It's about the cost. They're good bets for entirely different reasons that QJ or Anthony Richardson are good bets.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think that perspective is huge.
Right? And also when we're looking at the wide receiver class, right? Like okay. People will say I'm smoking something for having Hyatt below Tillman, and I get that. That's fair. And I could see people maybe putting Parker Washington ahead of him for sure, right? But the next few guys I have, Tyler Scott, Butte, Jaden Reed, Nakua, Mingo, A.T. Perry, Eusebius, Michael Wilson, Bryce Ford Wheaton, Nathaniel Dell. Are you putting these guys above Tillman with confidence?
The only one that I could argue would be Washington. And even then, I have just as many questions about Washington. They're just different questions. So it's what kind of flawed profile do you prefer? Mm-hmm. And the one thing I love about Tillman is I think when I was watching this film, he has that ability to just, even when he's not open, he's open, Like there were times that I thought he actually struggled against press coverage, like couldn't shed the DB. But it didn't matter. Like he would get these balls, like with a guy draped over him, Hendon Hooker would just squeeze it in there with good ball placement, and Tillman would come up with it every time. So that like at the cash point, using your body and your leverage to get open, Tillman does that better than anyone in this draft class. And that's the one trait that gets me excited about his NFL future.
As I pointed out earlier, look what he did against Kaylee Ringo of Georgia versus what QJ did and got beat up and shut down in the Natty. It means something to me.
Yeah. I do have SEC bias, not because I give a crap about college conferences, just because he played against future NFL players and succeeded, right? Like that's to me, like, Kylie Ringo is going to be covering you next year in the NFL. You've already beaten him. You know what I mean? My fear, again, specifically, is just how much more improvement does Tillman have in him? How much has he improved from age 23 to age 24, as opposed to Kylie Ringo, who's probably 20, right? How much has he improved from 20 to 21 or 21 to 22? Probably a lot.
That's fair. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's not beat a dead horse with Tillman. The hearse kind of makes sense too. So next is Parker.
Hyatt.
For you?
Yeah.
Hyatt.
Why don't you kick this off and tell me why you don't think he's going to be an NFL first rounder anymore? Because I think you're the first person I've heard say that. So yeah.
I think he was going to get drafted just on the promise. I still think he's going to get drafted highly, but I think he's like an early second round, mid second round at this point, because what people thought was his differentiating trait was this purportedly blazing speed, which does show up on film. Like he's just running by dudes, even a lot of trickery from Heupel, right? To get him just wide open, those clear out routes. I mean, he scored on the same, like of his 15 touchdowns or whatever this year, like 8 of them were on the same play where Tillman cleared it out for him and he ran up the boundary. But the 4.40 speed is not a differentiating trait. It's still fast as hell. Mm-hmm. He also had like a 40-inch vert, which was awesome.
Yeah.
So I think he's explosive, and I think that shows up on film, but I just don't know if I don't think his athleticism is at this point enough for anyone to take him over QJ, for NFL teams to take him over QJ, JSN, or Addison. So maybe he is a first round pick at like 30 or 31 or 32, but I think he's at best the wide receiver 4 or the 4th guy off the board.
Mhm.
And I won't be surprised if teams take Downs or Flowers or, maybe even like a wild card from this group that we're talking about now, like a Mims or a Tillman over Hyatt at this point.
Yeah.
Film
I think,
Bros.
yeah.
Let's say Film Bros have all had Tillman above Hyatt forever. Like all my Film Bro friends have. And who are the NFL scouts? They're film guys mostly, right?
Yeah. I think, except for Zerline, who had Hyatt, number 1 in his rankings at one point, right? Yeah, I share a lot of the concerns that you have with Hyatt. I think people dinged him a little too much on the combine, right? Like he ran a verified 4.31 in 2021, but like if we didn't know that, right? And a guy comes out and runs a 4.4 with a 1.50 10-yard split and the vert and the broad, right? Like, do we ding him as much as we did? I don't know. That's kind of a what if. My concerns with him were, I think, just I didn't even care what he ran in the 40. To me, it's a guy who, anytime he played on the outside, they stacked a guy with him to get him free release, right? They as you said, did the clear out stuff. Only produced really when Tillman was injured. Lacks, I think, physicality, at least enough where it's, to really translate in the NFL. He seems closer to like a one-trick pony with the speed than, maybe some other guys that you ding with that particular criticism. I don't see it. I see somebody who is, I know it's lazy, but he's more Ruggs, or Will Fuller than he is Jalen Waddle to me. And, that's kind of where I'm seeing him. But so for me, the reason I have him, as 10th, which is well below where people have him, is because I said before, I take in value, acquisition cost, and fantasy production into my rankings, and I see a guy who's got bust potential written all over him.
Yeah, that's fair for sure. I think so. Here's where I'm at on Hyatt, right? And I'm probably going to take him over the old guys because he's 20 or 21 tops. I think he's 20. So I'm just saying he's got a lot of room to grow.
He's 20.
He's got
he'll
growing
be 22 in September.
Is he?
Yeah.
He's still a third-year player, though. He was just an old freshman.
I guess so. Yeah. Like, and his breakout wasn't early either. So, like if you're gonna like lean on that box, not that I'm saying you do, but people who do, he's not checking that box either. So.
Yeah, I definitely didn't think he was that old, so that might color my take on him a little bit. I was assuming he was 20, 21 tops, but I do see some. He can get open. It just, he doesn't have a ton of routes, but he gets open on comebacks consistently. He can get open, on some in-breaking routes against zone. Yeah, I think he's got good hands and good ball tracking. So I do think there's ammunition there for him to succeed at the next level, but it's going to take some development and take some projection for sure. But why do we, we'll have this discussion about QJ and say, oh, QJ's got work to do, but he can do it at the next level. But why can't Hyatt develop too? Why can't he improve his route running? He's got good hands. He's got athleticism that you can't teach. So I'm just saying, like, I feel like he's left for dead mostly at this point. And I really do think he's got some traits that are going to translate. I just think, he's not probably, a top 5 rookie wide receiver, but he definitely has the potential to take a step forward to the next level and become a Will Fuller type player, which healthy Will Fuller is freaking awesome. Right? Will Fuller's a good wide receiver.
But healthy Will Fuller, and this is what I think what's going to be baked into Hyatt's draft capital is that he's useful to offenses to take the top off of defense and occasionally break a big play. And that's baked into his DC, which is not what we want in fantasy, right? As far as that much of a boom bust, right? Just the same way that I think special teams contributions are going to be baked into A-Chain's draft capital, and he's a guy I'm out on at cost. So I don't know. Maybe I'm biased. Maybe I need to look a little bit more into Hyatt and maybe give him a little bit more of a break if I've got QJ up there at 3. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what you're saying is logical and pretty consistent with most people are saying. I just, I don't know. The data profile is okay, not great. So I'm probably going to give him a chance over some of the guys that I perceive as having a little bit lower upside. But I think it's a really good debate there, like Tillman, Hyatt, like that tier. Again, it's, like, what do you prefer? But I am hearing what you say. Like, he could just run, he could be a decoy for 20 plays a game. You know what I mean? And then
so
you're
let me ask you this. You have the 111 and the 3.5. And someone says you have to either take Jalen Hyatt at the 111 or Cedric Tillman at the 3.5. You can't do both, and you can't do neither. Which one are you doing?
I don't think you have to take Hyatt at the 111, but I'm not touching him with anything. I'm not touching him with anything earlier than like 212 or 3-1. But I don't.
Okay. So that's where you're at with him. Okay, all right. Yeah. Okay, I got you.
I think the acquisition cost on those guys is the same, and really, like, I just, the draft capital might drag Hyatt up a little bit, but I think Tillman's going to get draft capital too.
Yeah. I've been doing at least like averaging at least 1 mock a day. Like, I'm kind of like bad like that. And post combine mocks, Hyatt's still going, before 203, 204. So
wild. I don't think he will by the time actual Dynasty startup season comes around. I'll be shocked. But if he does, then I am not going to have any shares. I have a ton of them in Campus to Canton because he was obviously a delight to own last year when he scored 3 touchdowns a game. But I would not add any shares at that cost either. So I think we're actually a pretty similar mindset on him.
Right.
All right. So I don't know. You got time for 1 or 2 more here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to hold you hostage, but I'd like to talk about Parker. Was he your next guy or was Reed?
Yes, he's the next. He's the first guy in the next tier. Parker Washington, Tyler Scott, Boutte, and Jaden Reed is a tier for me of wide receivers 11 through 14. Right? Parker Washington is, to me, a guy who's getting lost in the sauce. He's bigger than the smalls, but not as big as the bigs. He doesn't have like an elite trait, really. I think people, if I'm remembering correctly, sometimes these guys blend for me. I think there was a dip in his production from the year prior, 2021 to 2022. He only did the bench press at the combine, which is like, come on, dude. And so he's good enough. Got good footwork, got good hands. He's gonna, I think, thrive in a slot role and getting quick passes. He's got good enough athleticism from what we see on film, but nothing like hugely impressive. I think sometimes it's okay to have a dip in production if Nicholas Singleton comes to campus. And I probably if I had Sean Clifford or whoever was quarterback this year and had Nicholas Singleton, I'd probably feed Singleton a lot too. So there's something to be said about that. He's a guy who I could totally see putting into that tier with Tillman and Hyatt and the other guys I mentioned as just kind of meh. We'll see. But yeah, tell me what you like or don't like about him.
Yeah, again, the dip in production was upsetting to me. I really thought this was his year. It was the kid that went to Denver 2 years ago, and then it was Dotson time last year, and then I thought this was Parker season. And his freshman year, he's a freshman year breakout. Like, just got on the field and succeeded with Sean Clifford, right? Like, his whole career was Sean Clifford, and he was still productive as a freshman, 489 yards, but he hit a 20% threshold of the offense at that. And then I was just so disappointed that he wasn't able to get it done this year. And it's partly about Singleton and Katron Allen, but partly he was losing work to Mitchell Tinsley, And I don't think Tinsley, I think he's like a UDFA guy, maybe he has a cup of coffee in the league, but I don't think he's anything that we're going to need to worry about for the NFL draft or for fantasy. So for me, it's like, why can't Parker Washington come in and dominate reps there? I wanted to see him have, a massive dominator and actual production.
Yeah.
And it's just disappointing. But did you see the Ohio State game? Penn State versus Ohio State?
Was that the one in the snow where he was making like a one-handed grab or something? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah. Like he had some highlight clutches, but not just like a highlight play. He got a game full of highlight plays.
Yeah.
I think
That's
he got
encouraging against a team like Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, but Ohio State's secondary, not great, but still, just that's his upside, right? Is being that guy. I mean, he's awesome at the catch point. I don't think he's that fast. There's probably a reason he didn't run, and lacks some refinement. But I think he's a guy that could be, like play a little bit more of that wide back role. So kind of gadgety, but. Yeah, I have athleticism fears for him at this point in time, but I really want to like him. Young guy showing a ton of promise, but why didn't he develop on it? Why didn't he grow past that and really hit the next level?
The guy who wrote the profile for him on GoingFor2.com essentially said he could either be Lynn Bowden or Debo.
Yeah, right. I was going to say he could be Debo, but that's such a lofty comp. And frankly, I feel like Debo only had really one good year in college, right? If I recall.
I don't know too much about Debo's college career. Like, again, I don't watch much college ball, especially since I stopped betting. And so I have a bad memory for stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I could look it up. I don't want to do it right now, though. But I feel like Debo's analytical profile was also not awesome. So that is a potential, but I don't think Parker is that physical or fast.
Right.
So it's a tough comp for me, but I want him to be that. That's what I want him to be, because I'm in his corner rooting for him. So was it Jaden Reed?
Parker Washington,
or Booty?
Tyler Scott, who I might drop, Booty and Reed. So I don't know who you want to talk about, but
I don't have a card for Scott, but do you want to talk about him for a couple of seconds?
So, I have to admit, I haven't been able to see much of him on film. I'm going off of other people's evaluations and some numbers that I've seen on him as far as like speed and that sort of thing. But let me pull up I'm trying to go from my tiers to my list of receivers with my notes. So he ran a 4.44 with a 1.51 split, a 39.5 vert, and an 11.1 broad. I mean, that's good stuff. RAS of 8.30. He's gonna be basically a traditional slot receiver. He's gonna be a PPR guy. He's quick, and can catch off target throws. I think he's going to have to, like a lot of college prospects at this point in our rankings, are going to have to refine things and learn more routes. He's not huge. He's 5'10", 177, right? But, you can say that about a lot of guys in this class. Is there a really strong case to put him above Jaden Reed or Booty? No, but, I rank within the tier, but, they're in the same tier. So, I could wake up tomorrow and decide to drop Tyler Scott 2 spots. I could even put him further down and put him below Nakua and Mingo. It's just kind of where I have him now, because I've heard also, I'll add this, that a lot of NFL teams have been looking at him with positivity. So that's meaningful for us too, I think, as fantasy managers. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, he had a terrible production profile, like something that wouldn't even make it onto my list, but obviously showed out at Senior Bowl. Was the Shrine Bowl? Senior Bowl he played, and he got a 6.35 from Zerline, which is will be a plus starter basically. So Zerline is saying this kid is not only going to get a starting role, he's going to excel at that. And I mean that's why he is where he is in my model, which honestly is not far off from where you have him. Right. But I just don't know, because it's the same thing for me. He's a guy that didn't do anything until his last season. I think he's a senior or super senior, and it's kind of like, so you didn't do anything for 4 years that was of note to catch anyone's eye in terms of production or putting stuff on film,
Right.
and then you blew everyone out when you were a year or two older than him.
Well,
I
what's
do
what's
think
interesting is I have him here as a 3-year player because that's I only have stats on him for 3 years.
I think
No
he's a
one
JUCO
can
guy.
find this guy's birthday. Go try to find Tyler Scott's date of birth. Even now, after the combine, when some other guys' dates of birth have been published, no one can find out how old this guy is. He did have a dominator of 35% his third year. He did have EPA per play of 0.94 his third year. You know, at this point, we're at what in the early we're past 10, 11, 12 in our rankings. There's going to be blemishes. You know what I mean? Like, you can make the case for Tyler Scott as far as you can make the case for Jaden Reed. You can make the case for Jonathan Mingo. You can make the case for A.T. Perry at this point. You know what I mean? Like, who cares?
You know
Right?
what? I'm wrong. I thought he was a JUCO guy.
Yeah.
He's not. He graduated from high school in 2020.
Right.
So he's probably 20, 21, 22 years old, tops.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting to me. So
Yeah.
that takes away definitely, my biggest fear for him was just like old guy beating up on kids. So that's interesting. Maybe I do take more of a look at him at this point. Although if he does get drafted as like a second round draft pick, which is kind of the rumor, I bet he rockets up draft boards for dynasty purposes as well.
Yeah, right now he's in the 4th round of rookie drafts. If he gets day 2 capital, I don't expect that to hold, but I also don't expect him to really rise above the late 2nd. We'll see.
Yeah. So Booty, right? We talked with Booty, about Booty quite a bit already.
Yeah.
I don't know. Where are you taking him in rookie drafts? I think is the question at this point.
I don't know if I'm taking him at all.
Yeah.
If I'm saying I like the acquisition cost of a guy like Tillman or Hutchinson, and one of the reasons I do is I feel fairly safe, even though the case can be made that you can take upside swings in the 3rd and 4th round. I don't know that I feel safe with Booty at all with anything, right? I mean, he's going to go in your rookie draft if it's more than 2 rounds, right?
Right.
The question is where, and the NFL will tell us. The NFL will tell us he's around 4 or 5 guy, or the NFL will tell us he's toxic and he's around 7 guy. I think that'll help us figure it out. Right now in mocks, I've kind of been staying off him, but I don't see him going past the 303, 304 in mocks. So people are still saying, I'll roll the dice and burn a 3rd on him.
Yeah, right. I get the caution there. So say for some reason he gets day 2 capital, like late 3rd round capital, like pick 90, pick 95, pick 98, comp pick. Does that change how you feel about him, or are you just done with Booty?
I'm saying, what's the landing spot? Who's the coaching staff?
Yeah.
Who else is on the roster? Do I trust the coaching staff to make him a pro? Right? You know what I mean? I think that all that is going to have to factor into it. Yeah.
I just had a notion in my head that maybe he becomes a Pittsburgh Steeler. It kind of seems like a place that could maybe develop him and turn him into a useful asset for us.
Mm-hmm. Sure. But then you're also asking him to compete with Freiermuth, Deontay, Pickens. Some people think Calvin Austin is going to take a step this year. So,
yeah, he was good in college. I honestly, when I'm doing startups, Calvin Austin is one of those guys I'm taking in like the 28th or 30th round, just as a why the hell not kind of swing. Because, but again, like I like Pickens and Deontay's not going anywhere, I don't think. So not a ton of upside there. So Jaden Reed, kind of an interesting guy to me. I haven't done a ton of film work, but I thought he looked great when I was watching Michigan State last year, which I did watch a decent number of their games. Although a lot of times I was scouting Keon Coleman because I think he's going to be a baller. But I mean, I don't know, like super athletic, actually has some good analytical marks in terms of dominator, receiving yards per team pass attempt, things like that. Best season over 1,000 yards, 4th-year player, but it's not depth for me. So I don't know. What's your take on Reed?
I think he's kind of, he's meh. He's where we're at in the rankings, right? There's the pros and cons lists are starting to even out a little bit more, right? The blemishes are starting to be a little bit more. One concern is, after a really good junior year in 2021, he essentially has 50-50 target share with Coleman. So there's things to be concerned about. You know, what can I say? He tested well enough, right? So he's athletic, right? He got on my radar like last year when he made like a couple really good, amazing plays, right? And you don't like to helmet scout, but there are people who have pointed out like Michigan State offense and Michigan State wide receivers, don't really do well. And that once Kenneth Walker left campus, the offense really sputtered. So do you judge that as like, give him the benefit of the doubt because the overall offense wasn't very good? I think you pointed out some of the positives as far as the numbers go. He did check the box for getting a dominator of 20 plus in year 1 or 2. He had a year 3 dominator of 34%. Year 4 EPA per play of 0.86. I think he ran 4.45 right in the 40, so he clears that threshold. Doesn't really help his speed score, but the thing is also with him, the thin frame. You look at what was it, 191? What he weighed in at the Senior Bowl? I don't know what he weighed in at the combine. Hold on. I think 187, so even smaller, right? So a hair below 5'11" and 187. It's a pretty thin frame, and so you wonder if he's going to win the routes because he's not a burner and he's not super physical, right? So and he's not really a technician either. So how is he going to win enough routes to get the production that we need? Like, again, late 3rd, mid 4th round, rookie pick. Sure, I'll burn a pick on Jaden Reed, but I could wake up tomorrow and say I'd rather have Jonathan Mingo. So
yeah. Honestly, I think at this point in rookie drafts, I'm probably just not taking wide receivers, and that tends to be what I do. Once in a while, you miss out on a hidden gem.
Sure.
But typically, I want to just load up on running backs that are an injury away, and usually you can find a couple of good tight ends that just people aren't looking at.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're asking me, like, would I rather have Laporta, Musgrave, than that guy? Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's about enough. Honestly, I don't feel like, and you tell me if you feel differently, but I don't feel like anyone after this is likely to be fantasy football relevant. Honestly, the last 4 guys are probably a long shot to ever be someone that you really need to roster or anyone you would ever care about in redraft or it's fighting for a starting spot. But I think you're picking them up on the 8%, 10% chance that everything goes right. They take a step forward and they really become something useful for you. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at 14 receivers. Like you said, this time of year, we love making the case for. Personally speaking, I don't like to ding a guy, right? So if I'm really saying I'm out at cost on Hyatt, that really means to me he's a red flag. I will find the positivity for just about anybody and make the case for just about anybody until the draft capital landing spot tells me otherwise. Like the next 2 guys on my list here, Puka Nacua and Jonathan Mingo, I can make a case for them. I can make a case that Eusebius, is not quite Christian Watson, but damn, his size, his testing, he might be a guy the NFL team takes a dice roll on. So, you never know. I will say this though, after the draft, we'll be. There are going to be guys that are just going to be like, oh man, but there will still be a part of me that will make the case for like last year, I did a thread on guys in round 6, 7 and UDFA who I'm like, take a shot in a 5th round in a rookie draft. Right. Cause it's like, this is what we like as dynasty managers. This is the new blood, the fresh toys, right? The shiny new toys. And, after the draft kills your dreams and drafts, a guy you liked in the 5th round and the NFL tells you, then you're like trying to, scrape cocaine crumbs out of the rug and make a case for, I was making a case for Abram Smith being the next Mark Ingram for the Saints, and he just got drafted by the XFL 1 overall. So that's the way it is, right?
He's probably gonna tear up the XFL. That kid can run. But no, it's same here. We're obviously, we love to uncover the hidden gem. You know what I mean? Because it is like it's a little bit of skill, it's a little bit of luck, a little bit of blindness to faults. But when it pans out, man, is it nice?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, man, that's it. I think we did some awesome work here today. I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your perspective.
I don't know if anybody's still listening or watching at 2 hours, but
well, I will do too. I'll cut up this into some shorts, so we'll put out like wide receivers 4 through 8 and things like that, and that helps get some more eyeballs on it than just the 2-hour podcast. Which is a little bit much. So, Brian, just one more time. What do you got to plug? Where do you want to put the eyeballs?
At FFJunkie_ on Twitter, I kind of tweet out just about everything I do. Dynasty Fever podcast drops on Thursdays, audio only. Dynasty Saturday Night 5 live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Saturday nights in the Going for Two live YouTube channel, and goingfor2.com for my rankings and my articles. So that kind of sums up just about everything. On the Dynasty Fever YouTube channel, I've put a couple videos out recently. One is a 40-minute video of me making the case why Anthony Richardson should be quarterback 1. So go watch that and politely roast me in the comments. Going for 2 is going to be doing draft stuff, some lives with the draft on day 1, 2, and 3. So keep an eye out for that. I might pop onto those. Listen, it's rookie season, and we get to argue about these guys for 3-4 months, and then the NFL tells us, shut up, this is what we think, and we go from there.
You know what? The NFL didn't like Amon-Ra St. Brown, but we did. So, all right, my man, I appreciate it so much. Everybody out there, make sure you go log in to Going for Two and watch the Rookie Fever, and certainly follow Brian at FFJunkie_. And that's it for this one. We really appreciate everyone following along, and we'll see you next time. Awesome.